Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. My guest this week is my good friend, Michael Farnum. So, Michael, if you could introduce yourself, give a little bit of your background, where you're at, what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, first of all, sir. Appreciate it. So Michael Farnum, currently CTO with a cybersecurity integrator and reseller in Houston, Texas called Set Solutions. Also a co-founder and organizer generally of HuSecCon, the Houston Security Conference down here in Houston that just had one a few weeks ago. And been in security, I don't know, since full-time since 99, off and on since kind of IT and security since 94. And have done various and sundry things: security administrator, security manager, pre-sales, architect, engineer, practice principal, consultant, kind of a pen tester dude for a little bit, all kinds of stuff. So just been around. You know a lot of that background. You and I have worked together. So
we have worked together, and as you're breaking down the full time since XYZ and off and on since blah blah blah, I'm thinking, wow, you're old.
You keep talking, buddy. Think
I'm right there close. With you. Right there with you. Well, so let's start off with some stuff about cloud. You had posted the thing on LinkedIn the other day, which I thought was kind of funny, where you just rattled off, I don't know, 10 different acronyms that all start with C, and asked if anyone could tell you what they were without looking it up. And my simple answer was no. I could tell you that one of those C's was cloud in every one of them. Other than that, no. So I guess I would ask you to kind of go into a little bit of like what drove you to post that, and like what's the scenario look like out there in cloud world.
So the reason I posted it is just doing a little bit of research, trying to get in my own brain for internal work reasons on how to categorize different product vendors. So I've also posted things about the crossover that so many products have nowadays, so many companies have that are doing security products, and they all tend to start covering a bunch of different areas of security. And one of our companies that we all have to deal with out there is an analyst organization called Gartner. I think most people on here probably know who they are. Tony and I both had dealings with them in past lives. And this, not to bash Gartner, they're doing what they can do to kind of categorize the different areas, whatever they're analyzing. So what they do is create fancy acronyms to try to sum up certain categories. And what they've done over the years, in a lot of areas, but also in cloud, is they've created acronyms like CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker. They've created ones like CIEM, which gets really confusing when you try to search for it in Google, because it always asks if you're looking for SIEM, which we all know that is. But Cloud Identity and Enablement Manager, I think it's CEIM sometimes. And then there's Cloud Security Posture Assessments, CSPS or something. Just all those different acronyms. And what they've ended up doing is creating kind of a holistic catch-all. I think it's CNAPP. It's like Cloud Enabled something. Even I can't remember. And I was doing the research. And it's basically, the reason I was looking at that is I was trying to put all those in my head and figure out where one stopped and the other started. It just keeps going back to this. They've got to have a catch-all, because all of these different security vendors in the cloud they may start with something like infrastructure as code scanning, and then they'll go to container scanning, and then they'll go to actually cloud security posture management, which is the CSPM, where they're looking at how your cloud is configured to make sure you don't have any security holes. So they're basically just all starting to come together. And I try to drive conversations with the customer based on what their needs are, but I also have to have in my brain what some of those controls can be that they can put in, and who covers what from a product standpoint. And that was just kind of the basis of my research. So when I saw all of those acronyms, I knew they were all there, but I had not seen them all in one place when I was doing the research before. And it was just like, okay, let's see if anybody knows. And nobody really took the bait. Everybody knew the C was cloud, but everybody else was just kind of like, all right, Farnum, we get your point. It's a mess. So,
well, I don't know if this is the reason or part of the reason, but one of the things, and also not to bash on Gartner per se, but when analyst firms, Gartner, Forrester, whoever, when they create a segment, they decide, hey, you know what, we don't have a report for this thing called MDR. We're going to make a report. We're going to call it MDR. And whoever the analyst is then has to come up with okay, well, what are the defining factors? What are the criteria? What am I measuring this on? And in essence, they paint themselves into a corner, and the vendors too. And I've encountered this in the past, working as a freelancer with organizations like WebRoot at one point, or Cylance in the early days, where they were doing. WebRoot had transitioned. They were more traditional, pure malware, anti-malware. Right on par with, Symantec and McAfee and Trend Micro, et cetera. Yeah. And then they switched, and I don't remember I can't remember offhand off the top of my head the name of the company they bought. But they bought this company. They kept the name WebRoot, but they basically switched everything to the new company model, and it totally changed the way they analyzed the threat. And the net result was that WebRoot was as effective or better than these competing products. However, it no longer had signatures, and it no longer, all of the things that they were actually measuring on from a virus, antivirus perspective, they didn't meet. And the same thing with Cylance. Cylance was doing those things. It was able to detect and stop, threats similar to a McAfee or a Symantec, but it didn't do it in the same way. And then, and so then, they end up getting not included in the report, or they get downgraded because they'll say, well, they did great. They blocked 100% of the threats. However, we had to knock them down because they didn't have signatures. And it's all right, well, it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, we ran into that very thing at our previous employer where we were before. If you want to mention them or not, I won't.
I mention AlertLogic all the time. I have no problem with that.
Okay, so yeah, you and I were both at AlertLogic, and one of the gigs that I had there was analyst relations, and not fully 100% on analyst relations. I was part of the technical marketing team, that we were both on, that I worked on that. And case in point, they wanted to get included in the IPS segment. And there were certain little things that they didn't have that would put them above it. Or they had to meet a certain, for the WAF side of things, they had to meet a certain threshold of revenue or whatever. And if they didn't match that, it didn't work. So, but in general, to our point, it was more about a technical little point. I would argue that AlertLogic had a pretty effective, depending on who you were, pretty effective IPS. And they couldn't get included because they weren't. But that these companies focus so much of their effort on getting on that magic quadrant, or not just the magic quadrant, just the quadrant itself, that they tend to get driven a certain way, and it right. can stop innovation. But that's the whole thing, is they're behind the times sometimes with companies right. who are just I don't care, I'm just going to innovate.
Right. And again, I'm not a huge fan per se, but I'm also not trying to bash on Gartner and Forrester. But it is, in those cases, there is a tail wags the dog element to it of, you're a young company, you want to be taken seriously, you want to be on that quadrant or in that wave or in that report, you want your name in there. And so you end up introducing features into your software that have no purpose. It doesn't really do anything. Your software doesn't need it, but it's like, well, they said we have to have signatures. And it's like, well, what's in your signature? I don't know. We just, we
got it. No, I think there's more and more you're seeing companies who are just innovating and waiting for Gartner to catch up to them, and they don't have to be on that. I know a couple of CISOs that won't do anything without Gartner saying it's good. That is like 95% of their decision making. Probably not. I shouldn't say that. It's not. It's a lot of their decision making on whether they're going to go with somebody. I will say a funny anecdote is that one of my customers was looking for a particular type of vendor, and they printed out. They're a Gartner customer. They printed out the paper on this particular segment, and one of the vendors that we were just astounded that they weren't looking at in this space, we were like, why aren't you looking? They're like, we don't know who they are. They're not on the Gartner report. And I went online, looked at the same report they were looking at. I was like, they're right there. And he was like, wait a minute. He had printed the report out on PDF, and that company had got caught in the page break between the two printouts. So they never considered them. So it's just kind of a funny anecdote. But it kind of brings up a point. It's like, that's what they're focused on. And I think vendors just have to these days be like, look, I'm going to have to wait for them to catch up and just market some other way. And if they go and make me, and one way Gartner, I think, is catching up a little bit is they do this whole cool vendors thing. And that puts some of those vendors who are innovating out there in the limelight, and they get to put something on their site. And I think that's a good idea of Gartner to do that. But their analysts that have been there a long time don't think in those ways.
Well, and I think, so, again, I respect the fact that when an analyst goes to create one of these things, they've got to come up with criteria. They've got to, and
how else do you do it?
Right. So they come up with whatever the criteria is that they think is relevant in the moment. And, and going back to your cloud acronym example, maybe they, based on what they know in that moment, they give it some cool name. They say, hey, we're going to call it this. And the problem is that represents a moment in time. And the report is, typically a perpetual thing. It's an annual, hey, now we're going to do the next year, the next year. So new companies keep coming along, and the technology landscape expands, new companies enter the market, things are done a different way. And a lot of times the analyst is kind of stubbornly stuck in like, well, no, these are the criteria that we established for this. And it's like, well, okay, well, you need to change, you need to be more flexible about your criteria and maybe be a little bit broader. Like going back to my endpoint, my antivirus example, I had said to someone at Gartner, or not, it wasn't Gartner, it was whoever was doing the virus, like, was the virus total? I don't know. Someone was doing these antivirus rankings.
Was that NSS Labs back then? When they were still around?
I mean, this is many years ago. I'm old. But I told them, I said, I think you need to get out of the mindset of, we're measuring antivirus products and switch to, we're measuring endpoint protection, or switch to we're measuring, like, you need to come up with another way of looking at how effective is this at stopping this threat or this class of threats without being so prescriptive about how it's done. It's like ultimately, if you're the customer of Gartner, you're the customer of that report, and you're looking at that report to try to make a determination, like, you don't actually care about signature files or not signature files, or the nuts and bolts of how it does it are not generally as relevant as just does it do it well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of the nature of analyst firms, is they have to put that stuff together. I think they're starting to pivot a tad. I do agree that there are certain analysts there that do not want to. I mean, they've been there forever. They don't want to change their ways. It's really hard, and I dealt with a couple of them when I was over at AlertLogic. They don't want to see things differently. They've got their criteria, and they're not going to move. I think some of those firms are moving a little bit faster with the things like Cool Vendor and that kind of stuff. But it's,
in defense of the analyst, I would say, I imagine they also get just flooded with those requests. Just inundated, overwhelmed with every vendor in the world coming to them and saying, yeah, but if you would just change your criteria to, and obviously they can't
the same request. Yeah. We said the same thing to them. That didn't really, if you would just tweak that thing. Right. Oh, no. Yeah, no, they get it all the time.
Well, I can see where they, at some point, it's like, it ends up coming off as sort of like a hubris, like I know this industry better than any of you could possibly imagine, and and what I say is the ultimate arbiter of what is. That's how it comes across sometimes, but I think there's more behind it, how you get there, which is, yeah, I've answered 1,000 vendors telling me how to try to measure my own criteria.
Yeah. No, I mean, being a previous practitioner, sometimes when I look at them, I feel like they've got a little bit of that ivory tower mentality, and they're not actually a practitioner and haven't been for years and years and years. But they do talk to a lot of people who are practitioners. That's how they get their information, and so they're informed. It's just, I mean, it's the nature of the beast a little bit. It's never going to be proactive. It's always going to be reactive. That's just the nature of it. So we learn to work within the system a little bit, and then, condemn it when we have to, and say it's BS when we have to, and then realize that it's still got value for a lot of people.
Right. Well, all right. So all of that is slightly off of, where you started, which was just really just
a little bit.
Them coming up with the naming of these different categories. And it's like, I mean, it's a similar vein, but yeah, it's like, once they name it, the problem is the technology in the world keep evolving and changing and shifting.
Yes.
And like, they might say, oh, well, we're going to call it this, but then, along come, containers and container orchestration. And it's like, okay, well, you either, do we figure out how to incorporate that into this thing that we already named, or do we come up with a new name that loops them all in, or do we give it its own separate thing?
Yep. And that's what's happening right now. There's so many that are doing so many different things, and you see that in cloud. You see that in like the acronym SASE, which started out as cloud, which was kind of CASB, and then different things started, and then they finally just said all these things kind of need to come together, and companies are starting to do that. So I think it's a different consolidation world than it was 5+ years ago, and where you see, instead of companies that have a point product or maybe two products, going out and buying another company that has that, and buying up their customer base, getting their technology to make theirs better or whatever. What you see is a company that is doing A, and then goes and buys 3 companies that do B, C, and D that are somehow related to each other, and they put it all together. And that's very much happening in the cloud space. It's the ones that are checking for the security posture, the ones that are doing infrastructure as a code testing, which is fairly new, the ones that are doing identity and access management, which was kind of all on-prem stuff, now is they've all pivoted to the cloud, and then they're starting to go absorb pieces of those other companies. So I think it's the same thing that's happening all over the industry, in a lot of different ways. That's why XDR came out. You mentioned XDR earlier, because it was EDR, it was MDR. Now, Anton Chavakin goes out and has the three-legged stool, which is turned into the octopus or whatever it is now, because you have to have all these different pieces that are going into it. Those companies are all buying each other, and it's all the different factors that come into how you know what's going on in your environment. So
Right.
I don't know if I'm making a great point here or not. I just know it from a cloud perspective, it's all the same, and it's just a matter of who do you go to. As always, do you buy best of breed, or do you do something else? You know what I mean?
Well, I was going to say that I think that is kind of where this becomes more relevant to a customer, to a company, is, you might look and say, okay, well, I want all of these things. So I want, identity and access management. I want, security posture, like all these different things, but you almost have to make like an Excel spreadsheet and check off boxes to try to see, well, where's the overlap? Because if you have one that does these four and one that does these three, and you're like, okay, well, do I want to pay for both of those things, or do I have to go out of my way to try to find ones that don't overlap, so I'm not wasting money paying for something that I don't need?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even in things like with our vendor partners, when we're trying to figure out who we want to partner with for marketing an event or something. So let's say we had a golf tournament a few weeks ago, and we had, I don't know, 20, well, I guess it would be 18 vendors, because we had 18 holes and there was a sponsor for each hole. So we didn't care if there was overlap within those organizations, if they kind of competed with each other. It's the same thing when I run HuSecCon. I've got competing vendors all over that floor, but I just try not to put them next to each other so there's not like a cage fight or something. But if I've got an event that's got two sponsors, our marketing person, she always has to ask me, do these companies compete? And even 2 years ago, I was quite easy for me to go, no, they don't, or yes, they do. Now I almost all the time I have to go, kinda. They've got, they overlap here. Right. And to your point, is if you're a CISO or security director or something, and you're trying to decide between those, you have to look at it going, okay, I could buy this company that does 5 things, but these two pieces that I could get from them aren't really that good. It's not even a matter of just being best of breed. They're just not good. They're not mature yet. So I should go buy those 2. But in 2 years, they could be mature. So do I then chop those other 2? I'll put that back on. You know what I mean? It's not an easy decision to make. And that's part of what we do is at Set Solutions is try to help them with that. But it's not an easy job these days.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, like when we were at Alert Logic, people would sometimes come to me and be like, all right, so who do you compete with? And I was always like, that felt like a loaded question, because I'm like, Alert Logic did so many things in so many ways that it was hard to say. We competed with a lot of companies depending on how you looked at it. One of the things that is related but not directly that I think is interesting too is when I was at or after I left Tenable, they had hired this new CMO, and I'm not going to name her because I don't like her.
This is your podcast, brother.
But she was part of this play bigger foundation, and I've got the book, and the whole concept was basically, well, if everyone is competing in vulnerability management, instead of trying to tell everyone why you're a better vulnerability management option, figure out create a whole new category where you're the only one. And and they did that at Tenable. They created cyber exposure. They're like, oh, well, we're not competing with Rapid7 and Qualys in vulnerability management anymore. We're cyber exposure, and as such, we're the best company at cyber exposure. Yeah, it reminds me of it's always driven me crazy that and more companies do this now, but it's driven me crazy for years that Lexus would come out with a commercial and they'd be like, it's the first ever Lexus E5, and I'm like, nobody else can make a fucking Lexus E5. You're Lexus. Like, you're saying that like it's an achievement. Like, you beat everyone.
It's an amazing, yeah. I mean, you're just, well, in that's just complete BS. And the other ones is kind of BS, but you're just, I see it all the time too. So we've got all these companies that I don't want to fall in that category, so I'm just going to call myself something else. But it's exactly the same thing. The same companies like breach and attack simulation. Like, so your Veridans and your attack IQs and safe breaches and simulate all that stuff. There was one, I can't remember which one it was, that just, we're not going to call ourselves breach and attack simulation. I can't remember what they were calling it, but it wasn't breach and attack simulation. And it's like, I have all these friends that hate acronyms, like Gillis Jones. I think you know Gillis. If he hears this, he'll crack up, because I was talking to him on a Twitter thing the other day, and I always make fun of him because he hates the term IoT, or Internet of Things. And I'm like, well, I was like, you can hate it all you want, but it quickly and succinctly summarizes what the issue is. And those things are effective. So I generally don't have a problem with those things. But when you go out and you call it completely something else, and you say you're creating a new category, you're not creating a new category. You're just renaming it and creating your own marketing materials around it. And what you're going to do is end up confusing everybody who generally goes out and listens to what Gartner calls things. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. So
it actually goes back to the presentation that I did a few years back at Houston Security Conference, was on the marketing buzzwords. And last year at RSA, I went out of my way to kind of do a informal study of walking the floor and trying to like catalog, well, what are the buzzwords that are being used. And I did it so that as a freelance writer, I could, when working with a vendor, I could say, okay, well, here's these buzzwords. I'm taking these out of your vocabulary. I need you to tell me what you do without using any of these words. Because I feel like, you should be able to convey what you do clearly. And you can't do it if you're using the same word as 100 other companies, but you're all using it differently. That said, and to your Gillis Jones point, that said, I followed it up with, now, when we actually write something, when we put content marketing out there, we will still include the buzzwords, because they're table stakes. They get you into the conversation. If every other company in your arena is saying machine learning and you don't, out of because you're standing on principle, and you're going to say, well, no, we're not going to say that. And it's like, okay, well, you're eliminating yourself from the conversation, because unfortunately the customer is looking at it going, well, shit, everyone's got machine learning but that guy. So I'm like, you have to use the buzzwords, but you also have to be able to clearly explain what you do without the buzzwords.
Yeah, it's the reality of the situation. I 100% agree, though. Because if you can't do it without the buzzwords, then I wonder if you even know
if you have anything. All right, so the kind of last thing I wanted to kind of wrap up with, which we talked a little bit about earlier, was just let's spend a couple minutes bashing is a strong word, but let's talk about Microsoft. Earlier
you're going to give me 6 minutes to talk about Microsoft.
Earlier this week, they released a quote unquote research report, basically saying that Nobilium, which was the group that was behind SolarWinds, is active again. And so that got traction about, Russia is, doing their thing, challenging Biden. I looked at the report, and my takeaway was, so you're saying you got compromised. And, basically I looked at it because it was written as if it was research. It was written as if, hey, we've done this threat research and this is what we found. But when you read through it, they say things like, so we reached out to our affected customers and we're working with our customers to fix this. And in their little diagram of how the attack chain works, it goes like from here to Azure Cloud to Azure AD. And I'm like, all right, so what you're really saying is you got owned. which is problematic on two fronts. Number one, because your Microsoft and your operating system and cloud platform and productivity suites and everything you do pretty much is ubiquitous around the world, and it is a huge attack vector. And the other is just that we already knew about Nobilium. Like, we knew about them after SolarWinds. So how did you let them get you again? and if you can't protect against like known threats, from things like Nobilium, and defend your own products, then what kind of audacity does it take to go out and try to sell customer security products?
Yeah, we talked about it before. I come at it from two fronts. Idealistically, I have a problem buying Microsoft security products, and I will tell my customers that, because they are creating the problem and then creating products to solve the problem without going and which leads to my second point, without actually taking those resources that they're using to build security products. They could take those resources and go back and use them to help secure their products. I know it's not easy trying to secure things that have been around for 25 plus years, that you have to have certain support things in certain ways because of old ways that are still there. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, that's not even trying to turn a ship in the night, and not hit the iceberg. That's like every ship lined up trying to turn. It's just, I don't know. I don't even have a metaphor that would fit it. I get it. They're all over the place, but I still have an idealistic problem. The issue is that I've literally got customers whose CFO has completely gone over the head of their CISO and CIO and said, we will not buy X, Y, or Z third-party product because Microsoft has a product that covers that and it's good enough, and that's all you're going to spend money on. And literally said, you can have those products if you want, as long as they don't invoice us for them. And it's like, oh, okay, so they have to give us those products for free and we can still have them. That makes no sense. So that is what, and do they have a couple of products that are pretty effective? Yeah. I mean, I would say their Defender product's a heck of a lot better than it used to be. There's some other stuff out there that they have that's pretty strong, but and it's hard to go to a CFO and make an idealistic argument. I mean, it's all about the business, even the business in general. I mean, I get it, but
and like you said, if you've already been basically coerced into the E5 license because you need these other pieces, and Microsoft says, well, as a function of this license we've coerced you into buying, we're giving you these security products.
Yeah.
It is hard to make a case for going back and saying, okay, well, I need additional money because, their product is only okay, and only okay is not good enough.
What it's going to take is a 2 or 3 year cycle where either they're going to make those products better, or they're going to do what they've always done, and they're going to reach to a certain point and they're going to stop, and they're going to only have so many features, and then people will get owned because of those gaps. And then somebody else will come back and make a marketing spill and say, hey, they already are out there on the email and stuff like that. It's not enough. Go buy this email product and find what Microsoft doesn't do. I mean, we've been there for a long time. And I do have to jump, Tony.
Yeah,
so
no worries.
I want to say HughesCon October 20th and 21st of 2022 are the dates. So everybody's heard it here first. This is the first time I've announced that. I haven't even put it out on social media yet. So
I'll include a link when I publish this, and make sure we get people to get that on their calendars a year in advance.
And we will start selling tickets early too. So we'll have that start not too long.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. Sorry to jump off so fast, man, but
no worries.
Duty calls.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.